What's up everybody, we're back in BFA with another class guide. And this time we're taking a look at the revamped 8.1 Marksmanship Hunter. So I'll be going over everything from stat weights and talents, how to approach gearing, our BIS Azerite traits, and our overall rotation. And I will leave timestamps in the comments below if you just want to check out a specific topic. However, before we start, I just want to remind people that 8.1 was just released, so a lot of this is subject to change, but I will update any major changes in the comments below, so make sure to have a look there. So let's start out with the delightful topic that is stat weights. So our generic stat weights for pure single target is Mastery, Haste, Crit, and Verse. Going for this will give you a solid ground to stand on, and it will work out great for most type of encounters. However, if we want to take a look at AoE instead, you want to swap it around just a little bit. So you have Mastery, Critical Strike, Verse, and Haste instead. However, your stat weights can and will change. These are, as I said, just your basic stat weights. They will provide you with a good guideline to work for, but as I said, they can change. For me, when I sim my hunter, it looks pretty much like this instead for pure single target: Verse, Mastery, Crit, Haste. This is mainly due to the fact that I have practically no Verse whatsoever at the moment, and Haste is my highest stat, which naturally shifts my stat weights around a bit. Does this mean I will go out and chase all the Verse gear I can get my hands on? No. However, I might change a ring enchant or a gem to Verse just to squeeze out a bit more DPS with my current weights. I highly suggest you always sim your character every now and then to check your stat weights, but as a general rule of thumb, you have Mastery, Haste, Crit, Verse. It will get you very far if you just want something simple to follow. So on that note, let's go over to the gearing part of this video instead. As much as I'd like to give you a long, complicated answer like if X item has X stat, it's better than Y if the eye level is lower, it's almost never the case. Item level pretty much always win due to the fact that agility gives us pretty much the same DPS per point as any other secondary stat. It's just that you get so much more agility on any given item compared to secondary stats. However, if an item has a socket, the socket itself will weigh up for a lot of eye level, around 10 to 15 eye levels give or take. So a 370 item with a socket will be worth as much or sometimes a bit more than a 380 item without a socket. Of course, there's a few items out there where item level is not king, but as a general rule of thumb, going for item level will net you the most DPS. Moving on, so let's take a look at your rings and trinkets instead. Rings follow a different path. They don't have agility, so getting the correct stats is much more important here. Assuming your best secondary stats are Mastery and Crit, then you want to make sure your rings have those stats. Or at the very least that they're heavy in one of those stats, like 300 Mastery and 100 Haste, unless you can get Mastery and Crit on the ring. So my general rule of thumb is if I have a ring with my two worst stats on it, I would drop around 15 to 20 eye levels for a ring with my two best stats on. If that ring also happens to have a socket, I would probably drop 25 eye levels for it. It all depends on the stats and your stat weight, so when it comes to rings, always sim yourself with and without them. Also, try to get into the habit of saving rings you acquire. If your stat weights change a bit, it's nice to have a few rings as backup that you can swap around with. So, trinkets. Trinkets also follow a bit of a different path. The difference between one type of trinket and another one can be astronomical. For example, let's take the trinkets that sim the best and worst. Gale Caller's Boon our best and Cragnod Femur, which is our worst. If you have Cragnod Femur at eye level 400, it sims roughly 620 DPS. Gale Caller's Boon at eye level 340 sims roughly 773. My point here is the difference between some trinkets are just insane. So my biggest tip here is check out bloodmallet.com. They have a trinket ranking portion that they update all the time, so it's very easy to see which trinkets perform the best. But to give you a tiny BIS sample for trinkets at 370 or above, first out you have Dark Moon deck Fathoms, Gale Caller's Boon, Lustrous Golden Plumage, Harlan's Loaded Dice, Kulturan Cannonball Runner, and Deadeye Spyglass. Not counting in World Quest and World Boss trinkets. Gale Caller's boon will outperform Darkmoon deck at around 385, but until then, go Fathoms. The one thing I will say though, Gale Caller sims very high, but it requires you to stand still. So during a high mobility encounter, if you can't get the full value out of it, then don't use it. And lastly, on the subject of Trinket, this does not count in the new raid trinkets from Battle of the Zara lore. Due to tuning, sims not being done, but I will update in the comments if something big happens, otherwise just check out bloodmallet.com. So, with that being said, let's check out our Azerite traits instead. I'll divide this into single target and AoE and talk a bit about the upcoming Azerite system in Battle for the Zara lore. So starting off with single target, just a friendly heads up, I will not take in account Uldir Reorigination Array on these traits, because having one Reorigination Array will always be the best when you're in Uldir. So besides Uldir, for single target we have Unerring Vision. While True Shot is active, you gain X amount of critical strike rating every second and it stacks up to 10 times. With the new reworked True Shot aura, this is just a beast, but it does put emphasis on getting the most out of your True Shot cooldown. Next out we have In the Rhythm. When rapid fire finishes fully channeling, your haste is increased by X amount for 8 seconds. Important to make sure you do not clip or interrupt your channel too early, it really needs to be fully channeled. Following this we have Resonance Fury, Dagger in the Back and Tidal Surge, just simple single target DPS increases. Resonance Fury and Dagger in the Back lose a lot of value if the target dies before their dot has run its course, and neither of these are any good on multiple targets. And lastly we have Focused Fire. Rapid Fire deals an additional X amount of damage over its duration, and each shot has a 30% chance to generate 2 additional focus. Works great for single target and AoE. However, it's only really worth it to have one of this trait. So let's take a look at AoE instead. On top, again, we have Unerring Vision, making it pretty much your best pick for most situation, be it AoE or single target, as long as you don't have to delay True Shot too much. Other than that, I suggest traits that buff rapid fire. So next out again is In the Rhythm, Focused Fire, and we have our new trait Surging Shots. Rapid fire damage is increased by up to X amount per shot fired, starts low and ramps up. On top of this, Aimed Shot has a 15% chance to reset the cooldown off rapid fire, making it pretty damn fun to play with as well, especially on AoE. And lastly, we have Blightborn Infusion. It's just a nice crit buff, it works fairly well on single target as well. But again, as with everything, get into the habit of simming yourself with different traits to see what gives you the most DPS. Trait value will differ a bit depending on stats and things like that, and it's important to keep in mind what kind of content you'll be running. And again, bloodmallet.com is a wonderful source of quick information on traits as well. Next out on traits we have the secondary traits, if you will. The trait that sims the highest is by far Overwhelming Power. However, it loses a lot of its value if or when you take damage during its proc. So certain encounters can really shred this trait apart. Heed My Call, however, gives you almost as much bang for your buck, but doesn't have a downside, making it more often than not the better pick. And this is both for AoE and single target. On certain fights like Gahun, Gut Ripper shines a bit more due to having increased effectiveness post 30%, but it is fairly lackluster on AoE, so if possible, go Heed My Call. And lastly, I want to take a little moment to talk about the upcoming changes to Azerite gear. When the new raid drops, we will get yet another circle in our Azerite gear. This ring will have another set of primary traits like Unerring Vision, so new combinations will be available and it will shift the value of certain traits. Taking the first boss in the new raid, for example, you can get a pair of shoulders with In the Rhythm or Focused Fire in the first row and Unerring Vision in the second row, meaning best of both worlds. Same thing goes for your overall World Quest Azerite gear or Dungeon Azerite gear, the one you buy from the new vendor. If, due to this, something drastically changes in how we approach our traits, I will update it in the comments below. So let's move on to talents instead. It is fairly cookie cutter here for both AoE and single target. In your first row, Master Marksman, very simple to use, makes our rotation smoother and is our overall go-to talent here. Next, Careful Aim. The other talents aren't competitive at all at the moment. Your third row is situational, so depends on what content and what you need. Camouflage, for example, is great for certain dungeon skips or world questing if you don't want to get ganked. Next row, we have Hunter's Mark. Streamline can be better on very heavy AoE if that's your top priority, but most of the cases you'll default to Hunter's Mark. Fifth row, again, situational. Binding Shot is great for certain encounters or dungeons, but overall I just go post haste. Sixth row, Double Tap. Works great for both AoE and single target and is a lot less clunky than Barrage for AoE. Plus, it has the upside of not pulling an entire dungeon when you use it. And the last row, Lock and Load, is your default choice here unless you have one Unerring Vision trait or more, then you'll go for calling the shots instead. And as I previously said, this is both for AoE and single target. So let's move on to our rotation instead. The first thing I want to mention is our pet and the lone wolf buff. Without a pet, our overall damage is increased by 10%, but we lose all pet bonuses apart from survival of the fittest. Currently though, in most cases, having a pet is a DPS increase on pure single target. This again can shift a bit with gear and trait. For me, it's like a 30 DPS increase to go without a pet. So yeah, it might not be worth losing extra HP or leech for a 30 DPS increase. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the rotation itself. Cast Double Tap on cooldown right before you're going to cast Aimed Shot, or Rapid Fire if you have Surging Shots or Focused Fire trait. Cast Aimed Shot on cooldown, but only when Precise Shots is down. Cast Rapid Fire on cooldown, cast Arcane Shot to spend Precise Shot stacks and to keep yourself from focus capping. And using it to stay at low amount of focus is fine as long as you don't overcap on aim stacks, and cast Steady Shot as a filler. And as far as our opener, this is the one I found worked best for me and was the most consistent in its delivery. Make sure to apply Hunter's Mark before the pull if you're using this talent. Precast Double Tap to ensure that it is active for your very first aimed shot. Just before the encounter start, use your combat potion. Start casting aimed shot roughly 2 seconds before the fight begins. Follow this with Rapid Fire, then True Shot. After this you want to use 2x aimed shot back to back, then 1 arcane shot, Rapid Fire, then repeat this during True Shot. When True Shot is over, you go back to your regular rotation. And this is the rotation I use anytime I pop True Shot Aura, not just as an opener. However, during Bloodlust, or if you have insanely high haste, you want to use 1 arcane shot after every aimed shot during True Shot with Bloodlust. So aimed, arcane, rapid fire, repeat. This is so you don't focus starve and run out of aimed or rapid charges during it. So let's take a look at our multi-target rotation instead. It's pretty much our single target rotation, but you swap arcane shot for multi-shot when there's 3 or more targets. You want to make sure that you always have trick shot up before using rapid fire or aimed shot. You get trick shots from hitting 3 or more targets with multi-shot, so it all ties in pretty well. Which brings us to the last part, Consumables and Enchants. For Consumables you want either Feast, which gives you agility, or whichever food gives you your highest secondary stat, which in most cases is Mastery, so Sailor's Pie. Battle Potion of Agility is your go-to potion. Rising Death works if you want to cheap out a bit, but Agi is far better. Flask is obviously Flask of the Currents for more agility, and the Fried Grenades still works wonders on big AoE packs. And for Enchants, Pact or Seal of Mastery on your rings, and Incendiary Ammunition on your weapon. And I think this pretty much sums it all up. If you have any questions at all, make sure to hit me up in the comments below. I try to answer any and all questions as well as I can. Make sure to check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me in my work so I can push out even more class and raid guides. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave me a like and ring that notification bell and switch it to all. Thanks for watching and I will see you next time.